Food safety is our responsibility. It's true, isn't it? The food we serve, whether it's in our families, whether it is in a church, is our responsibility that it is safe. It's not nice after you've had a meal when you feel sick, and there are people who feel so sick that they need to go to the doctor, or they may need to go to the emergency department in a hospital, and that's not very good. What I'm going to be covering for you is mostly common sense. Nearly all food naturally contains bacteria. And sometimes these bacteria can cause food poisoning. What you will learn as we go through, if you don't already know, that temperatures at which food is served or stored or displayed will make a difference because bacteria will grow. Now you might say, well, we're vegetarians and we're going to be working with vegetarian food. There will be some slides that refer to meat because this is a government program. But for vegetarians, you might say, well, we haven't got too many problems. There are some problems for us as well that you will see as we go through. This may surprise you if you haven't caught up with it. The number of likely food poisoning cases in Australia each year is 8 million. When I first saw that, I thought they've got the decimal point in the wrong place, but they haven't. That's a lot, isn't it? So it is happening regularly on a daily basis. Young children, pregnant mothers, and the elderly are most at risk, and that's because the way God has created us, we have an immune system inside us that maintains our health and well-being, stops things from getting infected. If that immune system is a little low, then you're going to get infections a little more often than what someone who has a good, strong immune system. Small babies and small children, their immune system is still growing. Elderly people, it's going down the other side, unfortunately. And pregnant mothers, the body's looking after too. And so they would be more likely to be sick. Now, if you wanted a job in an aged care centre and you were working in the food area, you would have to have a food safety certificate 3 or 4, and 4 is the highest you can get. And that's because of that problem. So why is this happening, as in food poisoning? One reason, you cannot always tell by looking at food, smelling it or tasting it, whether it contains dangerous levels of food poisoning organisms. Usually you can. If you are going to eat something, whether it's in your own home or whether it is somewhere else, and you look at it and you say, well, that should be yellow and it's going brown. Your eyes tell you something is wrong. If there's no difference in colour, you say, well, I'm looking forward to this, and you go to put it in your mouth, your nose might say, oh, this doesn't smell right. So that's another signal. And if your eyes don't give you a signal and your nose doesn't give you a signal, and you put it in your mouth, your taste buds may give a signal and say, this is sour or this is bitter, and it shouldn't be. But there are some foods where you do not get any of those signals and there can still be a problem. We'll come back to that in a moment. Bacteria are the biggest problem. Why? Because they're very common. They're in the soil, they're on animals, and they're also on people. So how do people get sick from food? Bacteria content too high? It's interesting, the way God has created us, the body can make adjustments to small amounts of bacteria that are a little higher than what they should be. When it comes in most days, the body can make that adjustment. For instance, I've had people say to me, and we're going to be talking about rice very shortly. Rice and pasta, when it's cooked, and if it's at room temperature for more than 2 hours, there's a bacterial growth that starts that can make people sick. I've had people say to me, but we cook our rice at night and then in the morning we have it for breakfast. These are people who eat rice regularly. And we don't get sick, so what are you talking about? But that's because their bodies have made some adjustments. Now, if it got too bad, well, they're going to get sick anyway. But there must be an adjustment there where the body can still handle it. But that means that you and I, our bodies haven't made that adjustment. So if we were to go to that person's place, we may not feel so well if the rice has been sitting there all night at room temperature. Can you see that? Yes. And so when we prepare food for other people, we need to make sure that we understand how food needs to be stored, and we will go through all of that in this program. So how do people get sick from food? Bacteria content that's too high, harmful chemicals, viruses, toxins, and other contaminants. Even though most of our work is with vegetarian food sources, it is still very important to maintain strict food hygiene laws, and we will look at that in the next half an hour or so. It can take from an hour to a few days to develop food poisoning, depending on the cause. Some organisms multiply really quickly, others only slowly. And it's when it gets too high that you're going to start to feel sick. Food safety is all about how to prevent becoming sick from the foods we eat. And that's for what we do at home as well, but particularly for what we present to other people. The principles of food safety need to be applied in the home, when you eat outdoors, at your local shop when you're buying groceries, or even at a restaurant. This is an activity. Bring to mind the kitchen in your organisation. Now, for most of us, that would perhaps be our church kitchen, but wherever you're going to be working, think of that kitchen. Are there any potential food hazards that you are aware of? You can see quite a list there now, can't you? Dirty tea towels. Tea towels need to be washed after every event, church luncheon or whatever it is that you're catering for in the kitchen. Flies, mice and rats. The ones that are not easy to get rid of, well, flies are probably not quite as bad, but mice, maybe there's some rats too, but mice have been a problem in quite a few kitchens, maybe in your own kitchen at home as well every now and again, certainly in church kitchens, because they can have a party. There's no one in there most of the week. That's true, isn't it? And I know certain churches, and they have tried so hard to try and block all the tiny little holes wherever they may have been coming in, and for some reason, those little creatures are still there. Now, you know when they've been there because of their little black droppings. So you can take all the cutlery out, and you can take the crockery out, and you can wash the shelf, and the shelf is clean. But there is also urine, and you can't see that. And that will be on the cutlery, and that will be on the plates, and that is quite dangerous. And so what we've recommended to various churches, not many here in Victoria, but a few churches here in Victoria, where they've tried everything that they could to get rid of the mice, and for some reason these little creatures are still there, to have plastic boxes. And today plastic boxes are not very expensive, and you can get them in all sizes. And we say put your cutlery in there and put your plates in another one. So at least you know that that is clean until you're sure that those little animals are not there anymore. Cluttered benches, there needs to be room for food preparation. No running hot water. I don't think most of our kitchen have got running hot water, but if there's not, there needs to be. Dirty walls and floors. No cleaning products. And that last one is also an important one. Fridges that don't work properly. Fridges do need to work properly, and they need to be turned on. If they're going to be turned off during the week, which some churches do, they need to be turned on Friday afternoon for Sabbath morning, so when food arrives for the luncheon, that it can go in the refrigerator. And the refrigerator needs to be 5 degrees Celsius or below for the fridge, minus 15 degrees Celsius or below for the freezer. And so there are times, and I say this carefully, it's lovely to be able to pass things on to the church. And I've done it, and I know you've done it too. But there are times when we may have a fridge in our kitchen that isn't working very well, but it's still all right. You can't throw it out, so we'll give it to the church. And that happens. But we need to make sure that the fridges and other equipment in our church kitchens work properly so that we don't increase the risk of food poisoning. Most cases of food poisonings are the result of the mishandling of food, keeping it at the wrong temperature, and we will be talking about that again, cross-contamination, and incorrect heating. Food safety principles apply to all foods. The important point is to treat all food with care. Examples of high-risk foods. You will be surprised at some of these. And because we mostly work with vegetarian foods, I've started off with the vegetarian and then the meat at the bottom, but the meat, of course, is not good either. Cooked rice and pasta. They should not be sitting at room temperature for more than 2 hours, or that big bacteria starts to grow. Now, maybe for you and I, we are healthy, a little bit isn't all that bad. But there may be people in your church who are on chemotherapy because there is a problem inside. There are other people who may not be looking after themselves so well and their immune system is a little low. Or maybe they've been sick recently and there's lots of flus and things around. And so we need to make sure that when we serve food for others, that we obey those rules. Cooked rice and pasta should not be at room temperature for more than 2 hours. Custards, you might say, really? Cream cakes. It's not the cake, it's the cream. Unbaked cheesecakes, soft cheeses, egg products, mayonnaise. In the last few years, maybe a bit more than that, a lot of mayonnaises now have got raw egg yolks in them, and it's sort of featured on the front of the label to get you to buy it because this is a much better product than the others. There was an occasion, and it was a doctor who told me this. There was a group of people who were in the botanical gardens and they were having a party and had their lunch. And they finished up in the emergency department of the Alfred Hospital near the city. And they actually, most of them, maybe not all of them, but most of them had to be admitted because they were so sick. And it was actually determined that it was potato salad. And it was the mayonnaise that had been produced with raw egg yolks. And that had been sitting most of the night, but it was cool. It was not in the middle of the summer. And then they'd taken it to the park. Yes, they had it in the boot of the car. And then when they ate it, but you say, potato salad, that's so innocent. And mayonnaise, really? But it's the raw egg yolks that many mayonnaises today have. Not all. Look on the label. Don't buy them with the raw egg yolks in. Processed meat products, and we would know that. Meat, chicken, fish, ham, salami, and Strasbourg. So how do we stop food poisoning? Ways that germs move from dirty to clean surfaces is called cross-contamination. How does that happen? Hands to food. Always wash your hands before handling food. Wash your hands with soap. Dry your hands with paper towel. This is in the church kitchen, not with material towels. The government now has quite a list of recommendations for kitchens where food is served to other people. I can remember quite a few years ago now when I spoke to some authorities because there'd been a change in the requirements for food safety. And the man said to me, and so for your church, they're preparing all the food for the church members. I said, no, that food is prepared at home. Oh, he said, so you don't prepare it in your church? I said, no. It's prepared at home, isn't it? And it's brought into the church kitchen. Now, the people who are in charge in the church kitchen, the person in charge and those who help the person in charge, what they're responsible for is how they store that food and how they heat it or cool it, depending on whatever the food is. If it's a casserole or if it's a pot of soup, it has to be brought to the boil for 5 minutes before it can actually be served. Not say, well, that's hot enough now, don't want to burn their lips, so we'll serve it. It has to boil for 5 minutes, and there's a reason for that, of course, for any organisms that may be in there. Yes. And so our responsibility, yes, for the food we prepare ourselves, but also for the food that comes into the kitchen that's been prepared by the church members, that we store it correctly, we heat it or we cool it correctly, depending on what it is. So washing our hands, cutting boards, knives to food. And so when you change from one type of food that you're cutting up to another, you need to wash your board and your knife. One food to another, and that's raw and cooked. That probably refers a little bit more to the meat than it does to the vegetable area. However, still good to remember. All food contains bacteria. They can increase in numbers very quickly. They need 3 things. They need the temperature between 5 and 60. They need time, and they need water. Now, if there isn't any water there or moisture, they won't multiply very well at all, but they don't die straight away. They'll just sit there, and when moisture comes along, they multiply very quickly. And look at this. One cell can give rise to millions in 24 hours. And if your immune system was a little low for whatever reason, you will be sick. Any food served by our organisation needs to be safe for people to eat, cannot contain things that should not be in it, and needs to be in good condition. This means that we must have a food safety program that identifies and controls potential food hazards wherever we are working, whether we're working from our own kitchen, whether we're working in the church kitchen, wherever we're working. Maybe in a tent out in a paddock somewhere. We'll come to all of that in just a moment. Clean and hygienic equipment and food preparation places. There are 6 key points to breaking the chain of food poisoning. Ensure that someone is responsible for all aspects of food preparation. So the person in charge is responsible for what is happening, for the food that's come in, how it's been stored, how it's been heated or cooled. Each person handling food should know and practice safe food handling. And we're really happy that so many people have responded to come here today so that we can learn together how to keep food safe. Everything that we use needs to be clean and hygienic. Use safe food preparation processes. Those last 2 are very important in my mind. Adopt safe food storage. Don't have it sitting somewhere in the corner. Holding food safely until it is served in the fridge, in the oven, on the stove, whatever it is. The food safety coordinator, the person in charge of the kitchen or the group of people who are doing the catering, at every event where food is served, from church luncheons or dinners to food caravans and food kitchens or even a cake stall, someone needs to take responsibility for the safety of the food. Makes sense, doesn't it? And you need to pass that on to others, of course. And so as far as the government is concerned here in Australia and here in Victoria, there needs to be someone in charge that has a food safety certificate, but as many people as possible from your team that work with you, and some of them may only work once a month, they should also have a certificate. So the person who's in charge, the supervisor, must also help all volunteers understand food safety and safe food handling practices. Now, what I'm going to share now, I'm not being critical, but this happened. I was at a particular church quite a while ago, and there was a church luncheon, and quite a few people were sick. And there was an announcement that said, if anyone can come and help in the kitchen, that would be really lovely because, you know, we haven't got enough people to prepare the food for the luncheon. And I thought, well, I should go. So I went in, not to check up. Most of you don't know who I am, but I'm not that sort of person. And I went inside and I said, yeah, I'm happy to help. And 2 other ladies came in, which is really lovely. You know, your handbag and your Bible on your arm, and you've been shaking hands with people, which is nice in church. It's lovely to go to church and be with your church family. They put their handbag down and their Bible down, and they said, all right, what would you like us to do? And the lady said, well, I'd like you to do the sandwiches. And I'm thinking, firstly, you need to wash your hands. But some of us don't naturally think that way. And so it's very important when you're in your church kitchen that when people come and say, can I help you? Wonderful. Glad you've come. Wash your hands first. And where people need to wash their hands, and we'll come to that again, we need to have paper towel, not a material towel, or a tea towel, which often is where hands are wiped. at home as well as in church kitchens as well. Okay. One of the keys to safe food is good personal hygiene practiced by people who prepare and serve food. And we've said that a few times now. With soap, not just at the water run. And I mean, I do a fair bit of travelling now because I work for the division. And, you know, I go to airports and I use the facilities. And you see that so often. And truly, I don't particularly look for it. And off we go. Well, that's not what you do in the kitchen. Wash your hands again after visiting the toilet, after using a tissue, sneezing, and that's with soap, and use paper towel to wipe it. After handling garbage, after changing nappies. Now, you wouldn't be doing that in the church kitchen, but I mean, while you're preparing food at home, that may be happening too. And after touching pets, well, that wouldn't be in the church kitchen either, but that definitely would be perhaps in the home. Personal hygiene. As well as your hands and your clothes, hair and jewellery can contain and spread bacteria to food. So if your hair is long, which is beautiful, you need to tie it back when you are working with food. For yourself and for your family too, but particularly for other people. When it comes to jewellery, plain bands are all right, but the rings with a diamond or a beautiful gem on the top that has the little brackets to hold it in, tiny little places in between, bacteria can get in there and multiply. And so if you don't want to take the ring off, and that's a personal decision for each one of us, just have to put a glove on, all right? Okay. Personal health, illnesses, cuts and scratches can spread illness or sickness. And so if you have a tiny little cut and, you know, on your hand while you're in the kitchen doing things, and you say, well, I only need a Band-Aid, you need to put a glove on as well. And what has happened to me, and it would have happened to you too, what seems like a tiny little cut and it's not too bad, all of a sudden you can see, you know, under the glove, the plastic, you see some blood running there. Well, then you shouldn't be preparing the food. Okay? And if you're sick, go home. Otherwise, you can spread whatever germs that have got into your system to someone else, and that's not very kind. So, tiny little cuts, you can put a Band-Aid on and a glove, but if it looks like it's a little worse than what you thought, then don't prepare food for other people. Personal cleanliness. Tie back long hair. You don't need to put a little hat on and cover it. You do if you were working with children or with elderly people, but for us, we don't need to do that. But it does need to be tied back. Wear clean clothes. Limited jewellery. Plain bands are okay. Do not smoke. I think most of us have got that under control. Yes. Don't chew gum because there's saliva that can come out. Don't touch your face or your hair. Now, that's not easy. We're creatures of habit and we don't even know we're doing this, you know. Especially don't do that. And don't eat or spit. I think we've probably got that under control too. So if something goes wrong, how do we manage the illness or the injury? Any wound or cut on your hands or arms should be completely covered with a brightly covered bandage or wound strip. If the wound is on the hand, you should wear disposable gloves that cover the wound strip, and the gloves need to be changed regularly, and that's providing you don't see any discharge or blood or anything else running from where the cut is. All right? Cooked or ready-to-eat food should not be touched with bare hands. Use tongs, spoons, or wear gloves. I can remember a long time ago when the cooking shows first started on television. Can't remember the chef's name, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Probably not good to say his name anyway. He was very famous and popular, and he used to mix the salads with his hands like this. And because I teach food safety and I've been doing it for many years, I thought that's not very good. To have, you know, someone on television doing all this, and and sometimes he'd go like this, and he had a little towel on the side of his trousers, and he'd go like this. And then when he went to dish the food up on the plate, you probably know who it is, yes, don't say it, it's all right. When he went to dish the food up on the plate, he'd get this little towel that wasn't very clean, and he'd use it just, to get the gravy off the side because it didn't look very nice. And I've never done this before, and I've never done it again. I actually rang the television station. Again, I'm not that sort of person, but I just felt that it wasn't very good. So I rang them, and I told them who I was, not too many details, but that I was concerned with the lack of food safety in these programs. And you know what they told me? The programs have nothing to do with food safety. It's entertainment, and he can do whatever he likes. Okay. But ready-to-eat food, if you have a box of sandwiches and you need to put them on plates, you need to have the gloves on, all right? Okay, or if you're going to have the salad that you need to mix and you can't mix it with tongs or whatever, spoons, then you need to have the gloves on. Raw food that is to be cooked can be touched with bare hands because you're going to be cook it and the heat will help. Change disposable gloves every hour when they tear or when you change tasks. For your church kitchens, plenty of hot and cold water, refrigerators to keep cold food cold, and freezers to keep frozen fruit frozen. And as I said before, fridges need to be in good working order in our churches, just like we would like it to be the same in our church, in our home kitchens. Exhaust fans to keep the area free of fumes and smells. That's only necessary if you're going to be deep frying, like chips and other deep frying. I would suggest that in our churches that we don't do that. But if you happen to do that in your church, you need to have a fan. If not, you don't need an exhaust fan. So that's only for deep frying. Hand washing facilities, very important. A basin, soap and paper towels separate from dishwashing facilities. If your kitchen has a double sink in your church or wherever you're going to be working, for one of the sinks you can have a notice above the sink, just an A4 piece of paper, laminated, that says this sink is used for hand washing during food preparation times. And so that is what that sink is used for, not for anything else. Just while you're preparing food, that sink is for you to wash your hands, etc. Not to wash the food, that's in the other sink. If you only have one sink, well then you need to have a basin. Now in some of the new kitchens now, in our churches or renovated kitchens, they have a separate hand washing basin, and that is wonderful. But not all churches have that. So if there's only one sink, you need to have a basin, and that water needs to be changed fairly regularly, not after every time you wash your hands, but fairly regularly so that it's clean. And paper towels. And a little rubbish bin so you can put your paper towels in there. All right? So not a tea towel or a material towel to wipe your hands, it needs to be paper towels. The sinks need to be big enough to clean cooking and serving equipment and utensils. Most kitchens, many kitchens, not most perhaps, but many kitchens have a normal domestic sink. Now the church family has grown and our pots for our soup are about that big, and it's wonderful when the church family grows. But you also need to have a bigger sink so that you can wash that properly. And that is very important. That the sink is the right size to be able to wash properly whatever equipment that you're now going to be using for your church family or for the children or whoever you're working for. Uncluttered surfaces that are easy to clean. A place to store food where mice, rats and insects cannot get to it. It's an important one. A way to stop pests like birds, animals and insects getting into the kitchen. And an adequate number of rubbish containers to be able to store and collect all the waste so that it doesn't overflow. I think that's probably not a big problem, but it's good to keep that in mind. Receiving food. Keeping food safe starts from the moment that the food arrives at your premises. And so, people who come to Sabbath school will talk church lunches, but it can be any other occasion too. They come to Sabbath school at 8:30 9 or 9:15 if they're a little bit early. And they put their food on the bench where they've been asked to put it for the lunch. Now, whoever is in charge of the kitchen needs to make sure that that food is put into the fridge or the freezer or wherever it needs to go so that it is safe. Because lunchtime is not until 12:30. And that's quite a few hours, isn't it? And if it just sits there, that can be a problem. You are responsible, you and I are responsible, to store food safely from the time it arrives, either for church luncheons, soup kitchens, or whatever you're catering for. That is our responsibility, that we store it safely. Now, if we're going to be preparing some food there, we're responsible for that too, but storing it is important. We also need to talk about temporary food premises because that's part of the certificate. If there's no kitchen or food vehicle, you may need a marquee to prepare food in, or a tent. If you're out in the middle of a park somewhere, you need to have a marquee or a tent. Benches and tables need to have smooth surfaces that are easy to keep clean. Plastic tablecloths are ideal. If tables are nice and smooth, as this is, that's good. But some tables, they get a little bit old and they've got some little cracks in them. And what you already know is that bacteria can get in there and start multiplying. And then when we put food on there, it gets into the food. Proper food handling at temporary or permanent food places is important. So whether you're in a tent or whether you're in the kitchen. Personal hygiene. Proper ways of storing, transporting and holding food safely. This is more so when you're out in a tent somewhere. And how to clean thoroughly is also very important. Hand washing facilities near the stall. So we're still out in the park. We need water, we need a basin, we need soap and we need paper towels. You can make a water supply using drums fitted with taps from a camping shop. This needs to be separate from the dishwashing facilities. So where you wash your hands is separate from the dishwashing facilities. A way of dealing with wastewater when you're not in the kitchen at home or in the church. If you need to hire a portable cool room, get one with a calibrated thermometer so you can check temperatures, which is important. So for fridges, for cold storage, keep foods below 5 degrees Celsius. For freezers, frozen food, below 15 degrees. 15 degrees below. I'm saying it wrong, aren't I? Right, below. Yeah. 15 degrees below. Hot food above 60 degrees Celsius. Bain-maries can cause a problem because they may just be keeping the food nice and warm, and if it's for more than 2 hours, that can be a problem. All right? If it's less than 2 hours, that's not so bad, but if it's more than 2 hours, that can cause a problem. Wash all fruit and vegetables well before you use them, whether it's at home, whether it's at the church. Do not use food from damaged packaging, dented cans, torn or leaking packages, and cracked eggs. Now, what you do at home for yourself is your choice, but when you prepare food for others, don't do that. But I would recommend you don't do that for yourself either. Soups and casseroles need to be brought to the boil before serving, and the minimum is 5 minutes of seeing the bubbles in the oven and, of course, on the stove for the soup. That's when they're prepared off-site. If you're going to be cooking it in the kitchen, well, naturally, it's going to be boiling for a long time. But if they've been cooked in someone else's kitchen, they've been brought for you to use, then you need to bring them to the boil for at least 5 minutes before you serve them. Thaw frozen animal foods before cooking. Thaw frozen food in the microwave or at the bottom of the fridge overnight. Never put thawed food back in the freezer because the bacteria that would have been in that food before it was frozen is still there. And then when it's defrosted, and particularly if it's quite a while, those bacteria will start to multiply. Thaw cooked food immediately after thawing, for that very reason. Cook all foods completely, especially meat, fish, chicken, so that the meat juices run clear and the pinkness is gone. Reheat thoroughly. Reheated food should be brought to the boil and simmered for at least 5 minutes, as we've already mentioned. Check dates on packages. The use by or best before date marking indicates that the date at which the food will be at its best quality. After that date, some foods may still be okay, but other foods such as dairy products should not be used after the expiry date. Hygienic practices. Keep all meat separate from cooked foods or ready-to-eat foods. If transporting raw meat and ready-to-eat foods such as sandwiches, separate eskies or cold storage need to be used. Don't have it in the same one. Temperature checking. Keep frozen food frozen hard at minus 15 degrees Celsius or colder. Cold food cold at 5 degrees Celsius or colder. That would be the fridge. Keep hot food hot at 60 degrees Celsius or hotter. Avoid the danger zone, which is 5 to 60 degrees for high-risk foods. Storing food. Chilled food should not be out of the refrigerator too long. Throw out when at room temperature for 2 hours or longer. Now that sounds a little bit wasteful, but it is a very important point. And so when it comes to church lunches, and sometimes it's 2 hours or more, don't put all the food out all at once. When food is being taken, then put some other food out half an hour later, or whatever is appropriate according to the group of people you have, so that you will not be in the area of concern when it comes to 2 hours or longer. I can remember, and I won't mention where it was because that's not appropriate, but it's one of our churches, and there's an aged care institution very close by. And I was asked to go and to that church, it's not here in this conference, and to run a food safety program, which I did. And it was explained to me that every Sunday, the dear people who were church members, who came to the church, stayed for the luncheon, and any food that was left over, you know, you and I might do the same and say, well, won't need to worry what to have for dinner tonight because there's all this stuff left over. And they were allowed to take food. So it wasn't that they were sort of just taking a little bit here or there. They were allowed to do that. And on the Sunday, some of these people weren't so well, and the organisation couldn't work out what was wrong with these folk. And then someone said, let's have a look and see what they have on Saturday night for dinner. Because these were not nursing home patients, these were the independent living units, so they were providing for their own meals. And it was, what did they say? 92% was to do with the food that had been taken from the table for the church luncheon and had been taken home. Now, how they stored it, they may not have put it back in the fridge, you wouldn't know, but that actually caused that problem. And so a little bit later, not long after that, maybe 6 months after that, I was back in that church, and there was a big sign up in the hall where the luncheons are served. Don't take any food unless it belongs to you, like you've actually brought it. Don't take any food that is left over unless it's your own. And that was the reason, because these dear people were getting sick. And of course, as people get older, their immune system is not quite as strong as you and I. And so they would get sick a bit more quickly than what you and I would. Yes. Follow hygienic practices. Wash your hands thoroughly. This is now just the key points where what we've been talking about. Use clean utensils and boards. If you're feeling sick, go home. Use separate utensils for ready-to-eat foods and those that need cooking. Keep household pets out of the kitchen at home when you're preparing food for others. Most problems of failure in control of microorganisms in food can be traced to inappropriate handling in the food service area. Commercially, it happens, doesn't it? We've heard it. At home, but these are, the last two to me are areas that are of concern. Food prepared in advance, not handled or stored correctly. You can see that, can't you? Oh, that's the last slide. Food safety is our responsibility. Thank you.